to the March Society of West Coast Artist Demo. My name is Jim Stinger, and I'm the president of the San Francisco chapter of the Society of West Coast Artists. And if you're not a member, please join. Please consider joining. Go to our website. There you can do that. Today we are privileged to have one of our own members, John Barrows, be giving us a demo on a simple way to do plein air painting. So I want to give you a bit of information about John. John's work is realistic yet painterly. He likes to paint a narrative version of the everyday scene. His painting method is a realistic representation that allows the brush or palette knife strokes to show, thus connecting to nature and to the artist. Artist John Barrows, SWA, started painting at age 5. He took art classes from 7th grade through 7 years of college, where he earned a degree in traditional illustration from the San Francisco Academy of Art University. After graduating, he studied in Italy as a mentee of Fiorello Tassoni, who taught him the classic techniques of 19th century Machiavelli plein air oil paintings. He later attended illustration master class with many of today's top artists. He has a website, www.barrowsart.com, and encourages you to go look there for more of his art. So without any more ado, I'm going to start a demo, and then John will take it over from there. So let me see if I can get this going here. Bear with me. Okay, now I want to start screen sharing. Here we are. Okay, here is the video that we want to show you, so we will start it.
So let me tell you, the video that you just saw is similar to what I will be presenting to you today. The techniques that I used to paint this plein air painting. When you're plein air painting, you can get confused with so much detail that basically it could take you a century to do it. So you have to simplify greatly. Anyone who's ever done a plein air painting knows the keep it simple method. So what I do is what I'll show you. And I have my painting here, a white canvas, and I'll basically block it in to show you my methods. But before I do that, we'll show you basically a slide presentation once it's ready to be shown. Okay, so let me talk further then. I'm using basic tools. Everybody's familiar with paint brushes. And of course, it's always good to have a wide variety. You generally start with the biggest brush that you have to block in solid shapes. But one of the things I like to do too is use a palette knife, especially when I'm painting large areas. There's a number of different sizes of palette knives. I've seen them up to maybe 10 inches. So you could basically block in a large area. And I also have a couple other tools that I'll show you which greatly simplifies the method for painting. The regular shaped brushes, scrapers, all to make basically the form of a rock easy to paint and put on your canvas quickly, so that it doesn't take you a century to do a scene such as this one, which is, you probably recognize it, Yosemite's tunnel view. But this is one of my favorite scrapers for basically a palette knife to block out big areas when you're painting, where you could grab some paint, slop it down. And basically, you don't want to mix the paint too much when you're painting. If you do too much, then you won't have any shapes of forms. When you're plein air painting, again, you want to do it quickly. So have dark and light values, variation of tone, all within your mixed paint. So when you do that, then it greatly simplifies. And that's the key. So let me basically show you here. What I do is to get a large amount of paint on your palette knife, and then you can basically block it in.
You show the first slide, John?
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, this is, sorry, it's the first time we've tried to do this, and I'm obviously real adept at it. But bigger. Screen sharing. In Zoom. We should have rehearsed this, I guess. But you can see that slide, can you not? Yes. Yeah, okay.
Okay, good.
So this first slide is up.
I can't, so, okay.
You can see it here, right? John?
No, I cannot. That's, oh, okay, now I can. All right. So, okay, good, we're good. So when I plein air painting, doing the painting, I'm basically looking for a place that would make a good composition. But as you can see in this picture, there's basically too much information for doing a painting. It would be way too busy. There's no focal point. No one would want to be interested in a painting basically like this. So you can see where the red border is. That's the area in which I chose to paint. I realized, okay, that's an area that could make a good painting without spending a century of time on it. Next slide, please. So if you could see it, there's a boat within the red frame, and that's the area in which I focused. And with the houses across the water. And that's a good composition because the boat is the focal point. It has a foreground, middle ground, background. Foreground, which is the dock, which will show better if we can get to the second slide. The middle ground, which is the boat, and then the background, which is the houses. And so then I did a quick sketch with a brush. That's the only time I use a narrow brush when I'm starting a painting. And it works best to draw it out, the shapes that you want. You don't necessarily need to be too detailed in that part because details will be added later after you put down the basic tones. When you're doing a painting too, it's much more important to get the correct values than the colors. Colors can always be adjusted later, but the value, tint, tone, and shade are basically what will show you the form of what you're painting. As you know, a black and white photo presents a lot of depth sometimes, and there's no color in that. So this picture here, some of you might recognize it. It's Redwood Shores. And fortunately, I live near Redwood Shores. And I was thinking, well, I don't have a lot of time to paint tonight, but I wanted to. So I drove over to Redwood Shores and went to a place that I had walked by with my wife, and thinking at that time that I wanted to return. So I returned and did some plein air painting of that area. Sometimes with, for instance, this picture here, you need to not only block it out, but figure where you want the dark shades and tones. It's the shades and tones in the picture that holds the piece together, especially when you're plein air painting. It's kind of like the bass notes in music, where in music, if you listen to especially classical music, you'll discover that it's the bass tones that hold it together. Without that, it just sounds disconnected. Same thing with plein air painting. If it's with the dark shadows connecting throughout the image, then your eye will flow across the picture from subject to subject. And if it's not there, it would be a mishmash. It would be too busy. So with this plein air painting, it's what I was hoping to show you, but unfortunately, we're having some technical difficulty now. And so when I painted this picture, I painted it when it was still blue sky. But then the sky was starting to turn a golden tone. And so I decided to go with that golden tone because often when you paint, you want to do something that's a little bit different. You don't want to do perhaps what's really common because more people would be interested in something that has a little narrative in it or something that shows some story to it rather than just your atypical blue sky. It's more interesting to have like a golden tone in the sky. So with this, it was kind of interesting when you plein air paint. You want to concentrate, but sometimes people will drop by and curious what you're doing and ask you questions. And one of the questions I often ask people is, do you plein air paint? And surprisingly, a large number of people do. Plein air painting is now the biggest art movement in art history. There are actually more people plein air painting now than doing any other movement ever. So I've been enjoying it because I enjoy nature. I enjoy painting. And when I'm plein air painting, I'm just basically, I feel like doing it for myself. I'm experiencing the scene. And it's then when you're doing something for yourself that really you do your best work, because that's when your heart's in it. And people, that's one of the nice things about art too, because people can see that when they see your work. They're saying, wow, that connects with them. So I've been enjoying plein air painting, and fortunately, people I've been showing it to have been too, which is something I'm, of course, happy about. So I guess I could just continue with this painting and show you.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Okay. All right. So basically, as we don't have the slides, I'll show you the painting that I did that we'll be doing something similar to. This plein air painting I did on location 3 hours at Yosemite Tunnel View. And so we'll be doing something similar to that now. As you saw that first video, that was me painting this picture. All right, so basically 16 by 20, which is this size, is the size I normally paint. I have a carrier that I like to use. This carrier works well. There's different slots in it where you can put your canvas panels, and then close it up when you're done. And that way the wet oil paint doesn't get on everything. So oh yeah. Okay, can you? But they can see my what? Oh, okay, okay. All right, here's the holder. It's from Raymar. Not that I'm trying to advertise anything. I'm not. I'm just talking about what I found works. And so it carries these panels on the inside, 16 by 20, and it keeps it clean. So the oil paint, which takes a long time to dry, doesn't get all over everything. Generally speaking, white oil paint dries the slowest. That could be a week, depending on how thick you make it. Or darker colors like dark browns can dry within like a day and a half. So let me show you what I have here. Basically, we lay out the image. As objects move further back, they're more the color of the sky, which is basically the atmosphere. And the reason for that, Leonardo da Vinci's was the first one to discover this. He lived 1452 to 1519 in Florence, actually in Vinci, near Florence, Italy. He's one of the artists that inspired me to paint in the first place. The person that inspires me most, perhaps, is Rembrandt now, because I just love his very thick paint and his ability to capture any scene, and it looks freely and like he unstruggled. So with these, I'll show you as the object goes back. I'm not going to try to finish a painting, that would be impossible. I just want to give you a basic idea of how I paint. And so, as I was mentioning, the further back it goes, the closer or more subdued, less intense, less saturated the color is. So if the sky is blue, it would get bluer as it moved back through the atmosphere, through the sky. Basically, there's sky in front of in front of the mountains, of course. And so we'll get lighter and bluer as we get further back. And I'm sorry the slides aren't working because that would have shown you the full process. But I'll show you as much as I can here. So with the tones, it's sometimes best to start it with a brush, fill in the areas, and go over with the palette knife. When you do that, you're filling in the areas with the brush, and then the palette knife basically makes it so you have more of a rough texture to it, where brushes tend to be smooth. So because of that, you'll get a smooth surface. But as rocks are rough, it's good to use something that's more rough, perhaps a natural sponge, which I use sometimes, or like the scraper or the irregularly cut paintbrush, which will also give you more of a rock look to it than a straight brush would. But as this brush is large, I'm using this now to fill in the areas. And then once I'm done doing this, I'll basically show you what it looks like with the palette knife on top of it. So are there any questions anybody has? I'll be glad to answer any of them. Okay, all right, all right. And with this, I was contemplating just painting El Capitan and then showing you the texture on that. But I want to show you basically the whole process. And that way, when you plein air paint, hopefully it'll be easier for you because someone showed you a technique that works, and it's been a happy experience doing the plein air painting. Of course, every painting gives you new challenges, but that's how you learn. With a new process, it's always something, some new learning process. And as long as you can enjoy it, then it was a good experience. It doesn't matter as much if it turns out well or not. Yes, yes.
Talk about how you look at a scene and figure out the blocking in color.
Sure, sure. All right, so I was just asked to what I do when I look at a scene and decide about how to block in the colors on it. When you look at the resource picture, basically, as you know, I'm kind of copying something I did before, which I don't do too often, but with this, you can see that there are solid blocking areas like this, 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 and as it moved back, it got cooler as the sky is white, but still it has a lot of atmosphere on it, and it still tends to make it look bluer, cooler as it goes back, and warmer as it moves up. Warm tones don't carry through this as far. I mean, pardon me. For instance, this blue half dome, it's basically, it looks like it stands back because it's all blue. It's closer to the value of the sky, the atmosphere. And first I blocked this in with the gray, and then went in with a similar color with a bluer tone. Same here. And here's the greenish tones here. And the last things I did on here was, for instance, paint the trees here, and the ridge down there. As I was saying earlier, generally you want to start off with basic masses, basic tones, and then depending upon how much time you have, work your way to more and more detail. And as you do that, you'll probably meet a point where you say, okay, that looks complete, that looks done. And hopefully it's in 3 or 4 hours if you're plein air painting. Any time beyond 4 hours, it's basically too long, because then the sky has changed, the light has changed, and you're basically not painting the whole same picture anymore because everything's different. That's of course one of the challenges with plein air painting, because you're outside in the elements that are constantly changing. It basically keeps you on your toes and keeps you moving quick. So I hope you answered your question. So I'll just block in more tones here. Not too worried if it looks great or not, but basically my goal here is to show you what I do. Of course, I'm glad to answer any other questions anybody might have. You can start seeing the shapes now. It's starting to take form. And it's still, of course, rough, and will continue to be, but it's enough to soon to show you basically the technique for getting more details on it simply. And that's really what simplified this process, how to indicate the details without being too caught up in it, not being too concerned about it looking exactly like it, but basically simulating, presenting it, making it look like it sort of has the same feeling about it. Same like craggy surface, same depth to it as the real scene appeared to you. And of course, everybody sees everything a little bit differently. I grew up going to Yosemite. I've probably been there almost 30 times with my friends. So this scene is something I've always painted. So thanks to my wife, we went there and I had time to paint. And thank you, Eva, too, for helping me figure out what needed to be done, as Eva, my wife, has done this sort of work before. She's a writer, but we sort of balance each other out as I'm the artist, and we sometimes work together. let me basically cover the surface, and you'll see what the next step is. You can see here how much lighter blue the things are, the objects are in the distance. And most people realize that, or at least once it's mentioned, they realize it, that as things go further back in the background, it gets lighter, like the color of the sky, and bluer, especially if the sky is blue. But even if it's not, it still tends to be bluer. And a half dome's always been interesting to me too. I climbed it when I was maybe 17 years old, and with some friends of mine, and that was a great experience, except when I sat on a rock and got bitten by fire ants. But other than that, it was pretty good. So basically, it's what time is it, Jim? Okay, I'll show you the how I get the rough texture with the rocks. It's basically laid out. Of course, it's not a masterpiece, but I had to change my plans here. My main goal, as I said, is to basically show you how I work, and it works for me, and hopefully will work for you too. So let me get some other colors here real quick, and then I'll show you my next process. When you have a large palette knife, as I was saying before, it makes it a lot easier as you put in the tones and the texture of the rock. You see it's starting to look rough already as it starts to look more like the rough surface of El Capitan, Cathedral Rock, Vernal Falls, all those familiar formations that most of us have seen in person at some time. If you haven't been to Yosemite, of course, I recommend it because I think it's the most beautiful place around here. It's truly beautiful. So I'm not going to talk about happy little trees or anything, but my respects to Bob Ross, but I have a totally different process. It's more white. Anybody in the audience have any questions?
Here we do have a question in chat. What other types of landscape? What other types of landscape painting can you use this technique on?
Any kind of, if everybody heard that question, you can use this on other things too, as well as landscapes. Anything that has a rough texture, you could use it on anything that's large. Generally, it's best at capturing the texture of a rough texture of a large object. But it's best at, I would say, painting, capturing the look of a rough mountain, such as El Capitan, or even the ocean, the waves in the ocean, where, of course, instead of going with the direction of the mountains, you would generally be going sideways, back and forth, to capture the wave movement, to present that. I've even seen people, experienced portrait artists, do something that's not too different. Rembrandt, I believe, Rembrandt was born in 1606, lived till 1669 in Flanders, Holland, and he did a portrait of his mother once, and he used a somewhat similar method for it. He's used the backside of his paintbrush to scrape into the details on it, which is somewhat similar also. And he, of course, one of my heroes, was, I'd say, the ultimate portrait painter. So he and Sargent are pretty much the ones I look toward for inspiration. But I'll proceed here and hope I answered that question. Yes. Yes, certainly can. Generally, skies are smoother, but what you can do is you could always start it off. Oops. You can always start it off with a palette knife, but then go over it with a somewhat damp brush to smooth it out. It's rare when you get a sky that's as rough as these mountains are. So if you go over, of course, usually clouds are going sideways. So you would go sideways with it. And then you could go with a somewhat damp brush to smooth out the tones on it, to basically simulate the look of the clouds in the sky. Sure. Thank you. There's other things too, other little tricks. It's like the more often you paint, the more you learn little tricks that save time. And for instance, for trees, when I painted this picture, I used a brush that was actually V-shaped to create the shapes of the trees down here. It was a technique that I haven't used before, but it worked to basically show the shapes of the trees.
Watch it.
With the light somewhat coming from behind with rim lighting, it showed the form of the trees pretty well and quickly. I was able to just one after the other, just knock it out pretty quick with that. So let me show you with this, for instance, if you want to get a more even tone, you could always use something that's regular shaped like this and just run it around down the texture on the surface. Of course, you don't want it to be too evenly spaced because in nature, there's an unlimited variety of what something can be. So it's very rare for it all to be evenly spaced from one line to the other, such as this is. So you can always cut a scraper like this to whatever shape you want, make it irregular so that it more accurately perhaps presents the shape of the mountains or of whatever you're painting. And with this brush, as I was saying, it's also has that irregular shape, but it's harder to see on cameras. So with that plein air painting, you can really use just about any subject matter. It doesn't have to be necessarily a landscape. It can be even for instance, Andrew Wyeth, he was able to make a successful painting just with a small piece of barbed wire. And that's still considered as a plein air painting. Anything that you're outdoors painting on location, that will, basically it's whatever inspires you. And as a lot of people have said, art is therapeutic. Of course, nature is too. So it's nice when you can combine the two, art and nature. It's for me, it's a great great therapy, great getaway to see what I want to see and just get away from other concerns for a moment. Oh, okay. Okay. Sure. How about a break? Okay, let's take a little break here. Yeah. But we could, all right.
Okay, we are back, and take it away, John. And oh, by the way, I'm happy to announce we are able to show the slides that John promised you earlier. So we'll go back to the first slide, and he's going to talk to us about it, and then we'll proceed to the succeeding slide.
Okay, well, you've already seen this slide. Basically, it shows the panoramic location where I decided to paint. But the little red square shows the area that I painted for the composition.
Donna,
Yes.
obviously on a slide, you can put that red square, but when you're actually out in person, how are you blocking that off? Are you just doing it inside your head, or are you using some kind of technique?
Good question. Basically, I'm just focusing it in on that area, getting as close to that area as I can. You generally don't want to get closer than, say, 15 feet. So you can see it from a distance as long as with everything else. But with this scene here, as you might be able to see, there's a trail running along the water there in Redwood Shores. And I saw that boat, and so I got pretty much from the same spot as this picture is taken from, but I focused in on that area with the boat and the houses in the distance. Okay, Jim.
Next slide.
Next slide. Okay, here's the, it's showing. Yeah. So this is the same scene, but as I was mentioning earlier, we then got the golden hour, where the sky turned sort of an orangey golden tone, which sort of shows more narrative to it. Makes it a little bit more interesting that way. And look, I'm down on the bottom. Yes. So with this scene, I started painting it when the sky was blue, and then a couple hours later, the sky was getting darker and turned orange, and that's when I started painting. So my timing was, I made it pretty much ideal. That's one of the things, of course, you want to do when you're plein air painting. Try to put everything to your benefit. Where, of course, if I was determined on painting a blue sky, then it would have been harder, because then sky would be orange after I had everything painted or drawn. And next slide, please. And this is basically a black and white. It shows the composition. It shows the foreground, middle ground, background. The foreground is the dock on the bottom left. A little bit further is the boat. A little bit further than that, of course, along the water. And then behind that, the background is where the houses and trees are. It's often good to, what a lot of people do is do a quick sketch of what they're going to paint. And once they have their sketch, then they have a better idea of what to do. Basically, the map for their painting so that they don't get lost or make a big mistake when they're doing their final painting, their plein air painting. All right, next. And here's the final painting. As you could see, I painted the golden tones and from the sky. I extended the dock because I found that the dock was too busy. If I kept the dock as long as it was before, the end of the dock would be distracting. And now with it longer going to the bottom of the frame, on the bottom of the picture, it leads your eye into the picture this way. Of course, composition is something you always want to keep in mind, basically, so that you can have a successful painting. Next. And here's the painting that we've been working on. This shows the whole scene where in Photoshop on the photo that I took for later reference for this demo, drew a little square around the area that I painted. You could see if we were to paint it this way, there's really no or not much of a focal point on it. It's kind of busy. There's large area that's the same color. It doesn't do much. It's not very interesting. So I decided to zoom in, kind of like I did with the other picture, and focus in on one area. Next. And here's a photograph of that area that I decided to paint. And it shows the depth that I was talking about. As things move back, they get closer to the color of the sky because there's more atmosphere, more sky before the objects in the background. The further away it is from your location, the more it is the color of the sky, which is one of the helpful tools with painting to make things stand back. With the trees on the ground, it sort of plants it. With that, if you look at that just upper half part, it's like kind of almost unrecognizable of what it is. But then when you see the trees show the scale. The trees hold it all together. The trees are the foreground, and with the half dome in the background, the furthest back, that's the lightest and the bluest area. You could also see just part of half dome sticking through there. So that's one of the things I use artistic license on, to show more of half dome. I figure half dome is important, at least to me. I've always enjoyed half dome since before I hiked it, and I figured a lot of people would recognize it too, so it brings more interest to the picture. All right, next. Okay, and here's the black and white. As you can see, it basically has still the same depth. So color really isn't as important as a lot of people think it may be. As basically when you're doing a painting, you want to show form, volume, depth, and hopefully show some interest in it. So with this, it shows that, because there's no color in there. It's just basically value, tint, tone, and shade. Shade being the darkest, tone being the middle value, and tint being the brightest. All right, next. And here's the final painting that I showed you earlier. As you can see, I edited a lot to for my own personal liking. as I said, I moved Half Dome over. I put that tree in the foreground on the left, and sort of emphasized the falls, because that's the falls. Waterfalls is one of the reasons why people go to Yosemite, to see the beauty of Yosemite, and Half Dome sticking out a little more prominently than it does act in real life, but it brings more interest to the painting. Okay, all right. All right, is the camera on? Yeah, all right. So here I'm using a smaller palette knife than I was before. As I'm starting to work more toward the form, the shapes, the details within the painting. And so with this, I would truly say that the hardest part of any painting is the start of the painting, deciding what to do. And it sort of gets easier and easier as you move along, hopefully. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you have to say, okay, well, that one didn't turn out, so you have to start over. But it's the mental process of figuring, okay, what am I going to paint? What works for me? Not being concerned necessarily about what other people are concerned about or interested, or any movement or anything. But as I was saying, what's important in painting is what's important to you. The more interest you have in that painting, the more interest people that see your painting are going to have interest in your painting. And the reason for that is generally people are better at what they enjoy than what they feel perhaps what they should do, which might not be something necessarily that they enjoy doing. So with that, I'm basically laying out the forms now, and starting to get some shape in this painting to look kind of like what I showed you. And you may see some similarities at this point, even though it's still in the early stage. I need to tell you though, I mean, if you're painting outdoors, or at least painting from life, that's really the best way to learn. Because if you're copying from a book, you might learn something about composition. But if you're drawing from life, from a portrait or landscape, then you're definitely learning more. You're learning how to represent a three-dimensional form onto a two-dimensional surface, rather than, say, copying from some artist or some photograph, which is 2D, two-dimensional surface to two-dimensional surface. And photographs leave a lot out. Photographs distort. Photographs aren't always that accurate for what you're seeing. In many ways, I would say that plein air is actually more accurate than a photograph, because it represents the scene better than basically about what it's like to be there on location, which of course a camera is just a an object. So it has no emotion, no feeling, where if the artist does a painting on location, then they're actually putting some feeling, some of them into it, some of what they're experiencing. And that's one of the great things about art, because you're experiencing that, and then hopefully whoever is looking at your painting is getting a positive experience by looking at your painting also, and hopefully someone else will understand what you were trying to portray. And I have to admit, I often copy from artists that inspire me. As I mentioned, Da Vinci, Rembrandt, there's many, many others, mostly classical realism, painterly is what inspires me. But when I'm doing that, I'm not trying to copy them exactly. I'm trying to understand their thought process. I'm trying to understand what they did to make that painting. I'm trying to understand what it is that makes the design work, with the color, the forms, the shapes, and everything, rather than, let me just copy that. It's good to think in your mind, okay, what is it that they did? Why did they do it? And if you can do that, then you've really learned something. And it's an inspirational thing to do, as well as plein air painting is. And I recommend anyone who's interested in art, try to draw for at least an hour a day, which I always try to do. Some days I have to miss because like a lot of people have a busy schedule, but then next day I'll try to make up for it, draw for even longer than I did that day. So I almost always have a sketchbook with me. Sketchbooks are handy because, one, you don't have to show it to anybody else. It's yours. And so you don't necessarily have to say, see what I did, unless you're proud of it, but sometimes you might not be. I think almost any artist that has ever lived has done things that they might want to burn rather than show anybody. So it's a good experience to draw every day for like at least an hour. And if you do that, then by the end of the week, you've drawn for 7 hours. What I do is after work, I'll draw aim to draw for an hour, or sometimes during my lunch breaks, I'll draw in the time that I have to for the experience to unwind. It's also almost like a Zen experience, because you're sort of in a different mindset. You're thinking, okay, what is it that I want to do? What is it that I want to draw? You might be in a cafeteria and you might see the chef doing something. And one of the hardest things I got to tell you, though, is to draw a moving person. A long time ago, I had a class with Howard Brody, and he on movements, moods, and mechanics of the figure. But I got to tell you, if you can draw a moving figure, like some artists that I know, then you can draw anything. And the hardest thing to draw it's still image, not a moving image, is a person's portrait. To capture that person, because you're trying to capture not only their look, but something of their character. And if you can do that, then you really got it down. Then you have some impressive skills. When you, as I was saying, if you draw from a still image, that's a lot easier though. But I'll continue with my painting and answer any questions that you may have. One of the fun things too is to have friends that, as almost everybody knows, is to have friends that are interested in the same things that you are interested in, because then you have someone to do things with, and it also helps you stay on a schedule, whether it's going to the gym to get exercise, or if it's to go plein air painting, because I recently joined a local plein air painting group, and it's a lot of fun to plein air paint, get to know everybody, and see what their thoughts are about their process. It's also a great way to learn what their steps are, and the more you learn, the more you're able to do. But one of the good things about art is there's always something more to learn. It's about the adventure rather than about getting there, because it's impossible to have a perfect painting. There is no such thing as a perfect painting. So enjoy what you do, and just keep doing it, and you'll notice after time that you're getting better and better the more you do it. And that's in itself very rewarding. As you know, I've been painting since I was 5, but mostly I've done portraits. So I haven't done nearly as many landscapes as I have done portraits, but recently I've been really enjoying plein air painting. And that's truly, truly rewarding, whether or not even it turns out that well. I have paintings that are stacked against my wall of my studio at Art Bias. And I haven't shown anyone other than my wife. I might go back to them someday, use photo reference to finish it off. But problem with that, as I was saying earlier, if you're not on location, then you're not really feeling that location. You're not feeling the wind blow. You're not actually seeing the object in the 3D. So although I have tried to finish plein air paintings from a photo reference, I have ruined them too, from a photo reference. And so I'm always skeptical, cautious about touching up any plein air painting that I've done outside from photo reference, because it's just not the same. Question?
Back the next day or the day after?
You can do that. That's helpful, and hoping that the weather's close enough to the day you were there before, perhaps the preceding day. But it's not always. And when you're outside, that's really when you notice how many different varieties of weather there are when you're especially trying to do plein air painting. But what you can try to do, and what I've done is, say you show up there at noon and you paint till 3. And then with that, and then perhaps something happens so that you have to go, or the scene just totally changed. It doesn't look anything like it did before. So then you can go back there like the next day at noon, at the same time of day, and hope that it's going to look like it did the previous day, and then finish your painting. And with that, it just seems like weather in most cases is similar enough, although different, within the next 2 or 3 days in most locations. But as everybody knows who lives in the Bay Area, it could change from sunny one day and to cloudy, rainy the next day. And it's often hard to predict, even if you look at the weather report, see what it's going to be like. Thank you for that question. Something that's also helpful that you should do is, probably everybody's heard this before, and everybody at least that paints, is to stand back and look at your painting, see it from a distance, and see if it's anything like what you have in mind. And hope that it is. If not, you can always scrape it off or just start a new one. But just enjoy it. I mean, and the more you do it, the better you are. And it's really all about the experience. It's about the roadway and perhaps meeting your goal, or getting closer to your vision. But the thing is, you could have a vision in your head of what you want. But as you get more and more familiar with art, the more and more advanced your vision is going to be. So it's kind of like the cat or the carrot before the horse. The horse can never get the carrot because the carrot keeps moving forward on the stick that's attached to the horse. So just enjoy the process, and that's really what matters. But I'm going to get back and take a quick look, and hopefully I'm not too shocked. Well, it's basically coming together. But with this, I think it's mainly showing my ideas that I have in mind of how you can lay out a painting without even using much of a paintbrush, the traditional tool. I have also done complete paintings. Probably most of the paintings I've done are done with a brush, but I kind of find brushes somewhat limited in what you can do. And so it's good to have, as I was showing you, these different tools. Try not to limit yourself. But a lot of times when people are plein air painting, they might be doing it where they have to walk fairly far. So then, of course, if you're going to be walking a good distance to do your plein air painting, then you just want maybe 5 different brushes of varying sizes. You probably want a bristle brush, maybe also a softer brush. Could be almost any style. You could also use a filbert or a fan brush. Fan brushes are very good for painting trees, which is what they're known for. And try to have a light set. I used to paint with just 3 colors, the 3 primaries, red, yellow, and blue. For years, that's all I did. From probably until I was in junior college. I just painted it with red, yellow, and blue, and plus black and white. And black, I don't even have any black here, so I mix it like a burnt umber with ultramarine blue, which makes you a good black. Black by itself is known for looking kind of dead. When you're painting a scene, especially like mountains, you want to have a variety of tone. It's amazing how many different tones there actually are that you're seeing. At the very minimum, I would say there's just to represent the scene, you would need probably at least 300 different colors, including values of that color, to just have a rough representation of it. But because of that, it's good to not thoroughly mix your paint. Just have the tones that are close to the rocks or the trees or the water that you're using, that you're painting. And that way, with a variety of tone, you're more, one, you don't have to mix it entirely, which simplifies things. And the other, it gives you a more realistic representation of what you're seeing because of all the different tones in it. And it's nice to do less work, especially when you're under a time limit of maybe 3 hours or 4 hours or whatever you set for yourself for the plein air painting. So with that, it's that's basically one of the methods to simplify, as well as using a scraper like this, which gives you basic shapes. And this, as you work your way along, getting to a smaller and smaller size, more and more detail as you progress in your painting. So I'm going to put some more paint down here. That's one of the things you might be amazed with when you're plein air painting, how much paint you actually use on a scene. It's kind of amazing. It's with oil paint's expensive. If you're new at plein air painting, you might even want to start off with doing watercolor. There are more watercolor painters than any other media perhaps because it's easier to use than any other media. As long as the only downside to painting with watercolors is you don't want to paint over another color when it's dry, in most cases, because if you overpaint an area with a watercolor, then you could overwork it and then unfortunately get mud. With the benefit with oil painting is you're covering an area. If it doesn't work out, you could cover it again because it's thick paint. It's not a transparent paint like watercolor. So with the thick paint, that's one of the things I like about it. Oil paint, when it's done right, it really gives you a lot of depth to it. A lot of, to me, adds more life to it than almost any media, unless, well, of course, it depends more upon the user than it does upon the tool, which is the paint. But in most cases, the paintings that I like, such as I said, Rembrandt, seeing one of his Rembrandt's painting, you could see he has like a million different techniques that he uses to do a single scene. He'll use thick paint, he'll use glazing, he'll use clear gels. He'll wait for the paint to dry and then he'll brush over it. He'll even add glass, sand, elements to it to make that texture of that painting represent what he has in mind and what he's seeing. He, as most people know, he's probably the most famous, or at least one of the most famous portrait painters of all time. He, like in the painting The Jewish Bride, there's a large cloak in it, and he used a lot of elements in it, such as sand, glass, whatever would give that texture to it. And then once the paint dried, he dry brushed on top of it a lighter tone to give some depth to that fabric. And so with that, he was able to capture whatever he wanted to portray. And of course, that was long before photography was available. And so with, with those paintings, it's a great way to learn too, as I was mentioning. Great way to learn is to look at someone's paintings. If you could see it in person, one thing I recommend is see that John Singer Sargent exhibit that's at the Legion of Honor. And if you really want to learn by it, as I did, then bring your sketchbook and do some sketches of it, of whatever scene you'd like to be able to better portray. What I chose when I saw that exhibit is almost all of his paintings are static, still images. And one of the hardest things to do is a moving figure. And with that, I found one image that he did of a dancer, which was a quick sketch, which to me was perhaps the most impressive painting there. So I copied that into my sketchbook, and then did another one too, that I wanted to understand the lighting that he used, which works so well on that painting. So basically keep your eyes open and see what you see and try to portray it. And as this is perhaps one of the best times to live, because I mean, for artists, because there are so much resources. The photographs that we have are a lot better than they were in the past. So you're actually able to see what the painting looked like, at least in a two-dimensional form rather than a three-dimensional form, which is enough to study it. But go see it, and if you could see a painting firsthand, then that'll be an even better experience, more fun, and you'll learn more from it. So I'll continue with this painting here, and
10 minutes.
okay, all right. As I was mentioning too, I have an art studio at Art Bias, and during the second week of Silicon Valley Open Studios, I'm going to have an open studio for anyone who wants to go to Art Bias and see my work. Also, there's about 50 other artists in the same building on 2 different floors. So if you need to have a good positive experience in life, I recommend going to see that, because here are a lot of 50 plus maybe artists that are having a positive experience, bringing beauty into the world. And with that, it's definitely, I think, something that you should see. So that's the second week of Silicon Valley Open Studios there. And I'll be happy to show you my studio there, and my walls full of paintings. Well, with my painting here, we're nearing the end here. But I hope I managed to show you my process for painting. It's not, as I was talking, not as the same as if I were painting on location. But if my goal here is basically to show you what I do, and hopefully you'll benefit from it. And if you benefit from it, then I'll have been successful. And thank you for watching us. Yes.
Can we see a quick tree?
Quick tree? Oh, sure, sure. Yes. Yeah. There's a number of ways in which you can paint a tree. I mean, the main thing is, as everything in nature is irregularly shaped, you never want to make a perfect round or perfect triangle. And that's one of the things, if you look at any object, man-made or not, they're basically made out of two basic shapes: the circle, which is the sphere, or the square, which is the cube. And that's one way to simplify too, to see, like, half dome obviously is half of a circle. But here I'll do a tree and show you one way to do it. Because you don't want to have it perfectly formed. No tree is perfectly formed. So, excuse me, I have to get some colors here. And no tree is perfectly all the same color. In trees, anything that's green, or generally speaking, objects that are in the shadows tend to be cooler objects. That's if you have a warm light. If you have a warm light, the shadows are cool. If you have a cool light, the shadows are warm. So you want to basically not, it's kind of like more like feeling that tree, feeling what the tree looks like. Then, or let me see, to basically think of what kind of tree you want to do, and then represent it in the way that you want to represent it. And so that, for instance, there's maybe 100 different types of trees. And who's to say that the tree that you're doing isn't what a tree looks like when there's so many different trees? So I'll put the tree on the side here so that you can see, so that basically it fits with the composition. If you never want to put anything in the exact center, vertically or horizontal. Generally, the focal point or the best composition point to put something in the foreground is if you divide a painting in thirds, vertically and horizontally, where the adjoining lines are, that's the best spot to place it. Either here, 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 or here. And then when you do that, then it fits with the composition. And maybe I should say a happy little tree. But there you go, there's a tree.
Thank you, John, so
All right.
much.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate you showing us your simple technique for
All right.
doing plein air painting.
Mhm.
We have, let's see, a comment here. How do you decide when your painting is done and ready to show the world?
Well, you don't always want to show it to the world. I That's a good question. It's good to have someone in your relationship that you can totally trust their opinion. I did a 10-minute sketch of an actor at the Dickens Fair, and I was thinking, I'll just keep it in my sketchbook. And someone, my wife, honestly told me, I think you should enter that to the Society of West Coast Artists show and see if they'll accept it. I was going, no, I only spent 10 minutes on it. So it's not a completed painting or anything. But I figured, okay, sometimes you're too close to your subject matter to make an honest opinion for yourself. So it's good to ask somebody else. Of course, there's also this paintings that or drawings that you realize, no, I'm going to keep that hidden, not even show it to anybody. Or there's ones in which you're in question, and I ask that person that you're close to if you're in doubt, and they should answer you honestly and say yes or no. If they say no, then you're okay. You'll of course do more work, and eventually you'll do one that's worth hopefully entering and hopefully getting accepted into some art show, or at least even if you don't do that, to show it to your friends and enjoy it. All right, thank you. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
All right.